some moments in history don't just shift the landscape, they fracture it. They create entirely new continents of power almost overnight. We often think of empires expanding gradually, but sometimes a single sudden and frankly unexpected victory can transform a commercial trading company into this massive imperial power.
And that's exactly what we're talking about today.
That is the story of June 23, 1757, and the conflict known as the Battle of Plassey. It sounds like just a localized skirmish, but it was, in reality, the precise foundation stone of the British Empire in India.
The moment the ledger book was swapped for the scepter.
Exactly.
And that transformation, that radical pivot, that's what our deep dive is focused on today. Our mission is to take you through the sources to understand exactly how this single engagement established the framework for sustained British power on the subcontinent.
Okay.
We're going to connect the mechanics of the battle, its sheer improbability, to its profound and frankly irreversible consequences.
And what do our sources say?
The sources we've compiled paint a picture of a calculated risk, a risk that paid off astronomically, and it changed the trajectory of India from, a collection of independent regional powers towards centuries of colonial dominance.
The sources are crystal clear on the magnitude of this. So let's set the stage for this turning point. We're talking about a confrontation between the British East India Company, the EIC.
Right, led by Colonel Robert Clive.
And the reigning Nawab of Bengal, Siraj ud-Daulah.
Yeah, and it's crucial to understand the context here. Relations between the very ambitious EIC and the young, volatile Nawab had completely deteriorated.
They had broken down.
Totally. The Nawab feared the EIC's growing military might and its commercial independence in his territory. This tension had already boiled over the year before with the Nawab's successful and brutal seizure of Calcutta.
Exactly. So Clive and the EIC, they weren't fighting from a position of strength there.
Not at all.
They were fighting out of desperation. They were trying to recover from those losses, those humiliations. They absolutely needed to reestablish their presence and recoup staggering financial losses.
So that date, June 23, 1757, it really became the day of reckoning.
And the outcome?
Well, the outcome was, as our sources put it, a definitive and absolute victory for the British East India Company. And while the EIC forces were a mix of European regulars and Indian troops, the sepoys, the sheer numbers involved, should make this victory seem impossible.
That's the first thing that really jumps out at you. Let's just talk about the scale for a second.
Okay.
Clive arrived with maybe 3,000 troops in total, and of that, only about 1,000 were Europeans.
And the Nawab's army?
The Nawab's army was estimated to be around 50,000 men.
50,000.
50,000, including significant cavalry and heavy artillery.
A 50,000 strong army versus 3,000. On paper, this should have been a rout for the Nawab.
A complete rout.
And that's why the sources stress that Plassey became a pivotal turning point in Indian history. It's because the British secured this victory despite being so significantly outnumbered. It's a compelling anomaly.
Right, it demands an explanation beyond just, superior tactics.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've got this massive numerical disparity. So if the British East India Company was so heavily disadvantaged, how? How did they secure this victory?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the victory was engineered. It was fundamentally a political coup disguised as the skirmish. The operational method of the British win was achieved through strategic alliances and, crucially, massive internal manipulation and betrayal.
And this is where the story shifts from military history to, almost a geopolitical conspiracy.
It is. The EIC, realizing they couldn't win through brute force, had spent months cultivating dissent within the Nawab's own court and his high command.
They targeted the weak links.
They targeted those whose loyalty was already compromised, yeah. The sources confirmed this was a calculated risk of the highest order. The EIC's success hinged on a secret deal, the Treaty of Murshidabad, negotiated right before the battle.
And this deal promised the Nawabship of Bengal to a high-ranking commander in the current Nawab's own army,
in exchange for non-intervention on the battlefield.
And we have to name names here because this figure's defection is arguably the most consequential betrayal in 18th century Indian history.
Absolutely. The central figure was Mir Jafar. He commanded a substantial portion of the Nawab's troops. We're talking tens of thousands of men, cavalry, artillery.
So what, like 2/3 of the entire Bengali force?
Roughly, yeah. The sources really emphasized that his defection was the single most notable factor. The agreement with Mir Jafar, orchestrated by Clive, essentially neutralized the majority of the opposing army before a single shot was even fired.
So Mir Jafar gets the throne.
And the EIC secures massive financial reparations and trading concessions.
But the betrayal wasn't just Mir Jafar, was it?
No, you're right. The sources also highlight the critical role played by the powerful financiers of Bengal, particularly the wealthy banking family known as the Jagat Seths.
Okay.
They held immense sway, and they deeply resented the current Nawab's erratic governance and his demands for wealth.
So the betrayal was multi-layered. You've got a high-ranking military commander defecting, and he's backed by the province's financial elite.
Exactly. It ensured that even if Mir Jafar had a change of heart, the financial and political support for the Nawab was just gone.
So what happened on the day?
Well, when the armies finally met at Plassey, the battle itself was short. It lasted mere hours, surprisingly low in casualties. On the day, Clive opened fire, and in response, Mir Jafar, true to the secret treaty, held back his massive contingent of forces.
He just stood there.
Positioned them to observe rather than engage.
And that non-participation must have been devastating for morale.
Oh, completely. The loyal troops fighting for the Nawab, seeing the vast majority of their own army just standing idle, they lost morale and quickly fell into confusion and panic.
It turned the battle into an almost non-contest.
It did. It confirmed that Plassey was not a feat of military supremacy, but an engineered political outcome.
So the immediate win was secured through internal rot. But as you said earlier, that's just the opening act.
Right.
The true significance of Plassey lies in the seismic consequences that followed, fundamentally changing the EIC's entire identity.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Before Plassey, the EIC was, by its charter, a commercial entity.
A trading company.
A trading company. Its primary goal was trade. Exporting textiles, spices, saltpeter back to Britain, all while trying to maximize profit.
But after Plassey,
the victory instantly transformed the EIC into a territorial sovereign.
Wow.
They weren't just merchants anymore. They had become the power brokers, able to dictate terms to their new puppet, Nawab Mir Jafar. They transitioned from trading company to ruling authority basically overnight.
And that change in status came with the most critical immediate benefit: control over the rich resources and the whole revenue system of Bengal.
And Bengal was enormous, one of the wealthiest provinces in the entire Mughal Empire.
So getting command over that wasn't just a nice political win, it was an economic revolution that supplied the capital for everything that came next.
Exactly. And let's talk about the specific legal framework that formalized this control, because it's a key insight from our sources.
Okay.
While Clive put Mir Jafar on the throne, the real power transfer happened a few years later, in 1765, after another small conflict.
So post-Plassey, they had influence, but the definitive legal framework for control came later.
That's right, with the acquisition of the Diwani rights in 1765. This term is critical.
Diwani.
Diwani. It essentially means the right to collect revenue and administer civil justice in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
So they became the tax collectors.
The EIC, through this legal mechanism, became the tax collector for this massive productive region. They took control of the entire administrative apparatus, effectively becoming the state without being formally responsible for all of governance. A highly lucrative, low-liability arrangement.
That is the long-term strategic impact. That underpins the entire British Empire in India.
It does.
The control of Bengal's vast wealth, its land revenue streams, its income from exports, it provided the undeniable financial and military foundation for the British to expand their power across the whole subcontinent.
Think about it. Before Plassey, the EIC had to constantly import massive amounts of gold and silver from Britain to pay for Indian goods.
Right, which was unsustainable.
And politically unpopular back home. But now they didn't need to import foreign funds. They could self-fund their expansion. They used the enormous revenue generated within Bengal Indian tax money to finance their army, pay their sepoys, buy Indian goods for export, and fund their wars against rival Indian states and the French.
This self-funding mechanism was revolutionary.
It was. That wealth allowed the EIC to organize and maintain a powerful professional army, expanding their footprint province by province without relying on the British Crown for consistent funding. Plassey didn't just win them a battle, it gave them an unlimited war chest.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of the EIC. The Battle of Plassey wasn't just a military engagement. It was the ultimate example of economic and political warfare. By leveraging internal betrayal and immediately seizing the rich province of Bengal as a financial base, the EIC established the framework for sustained colonial rule. It was the definition of a tipping point, executed flawlessly.
Absolutely. The sources confirm that this engineered outcome initiated a period of British dominance that profoundly reshaped the subcontinent's political structure, its economic systems, and its social landscape for the next 200 years.
It's impossible to discuss the rise of the Raj without starting right here.
At Plassey, 1757.
Yeah.
You have to.
So to recap the core synthesis of our sources, Plassey was a strategically engineered victory secured by the massive defection of Mir Jafar and the backing of Bengali financiers.
Right.
This victory provided the essential financial framework for British colonial rule by turning a trading company into a territorial sovereign overnight through the acquisition of the Diwani rights over Bengal's immensely rich resources.
And this raises an important question for you to consider, long after the details of the betrayal fade. This event vividly demonstrates the geopolitical vulnerabilities of any state when commercial influence, aided by internal defection, gains leverage over the state's finances and military structure.
So if the wealth of a nation can be controlled by a commercial entity,
even the largest army can be rendered inert. The path from trade to rule begins with securing that critical financial foothold, and that is the lasting lesson the British East India Company taught the world at Plassey. So if you're tracking the history of these, huge global power shifts, there's one date that really stands out for British India, and that's 1757, specifically the Battle of Plassey.
Right.
If you think the story of the British Raj just starts with, ships and trade treaties, that's only half of it. This was the exact brutal moment where the British East India Company, a private company,
just a corporation.
Exactly, just a corporation. This is where they stopped being guests or traders and started acting like rulers.
It really is the ultimate inflection point, not just for India, but for this whole idea of commercial imperialism. So our mission in this deep dive is to get past the simple military history.
Yeah, the troop movements and all that.
Exactly. We need to unpack the really complex factors, the 5 main drivers that let this power grab actually happen. We're looking at how a fight between the local ruler, the Nawab of Bengal, ud-Daulah, and the EIC.
A young ruler, too.
A very young ruler. How that dispute became the foundation for 2 centuries of colonial rule.
We're charting the course from commerce to conquest. How does a corporation, one that's supposed to be operating with permission, end up dethroning the guy who gave them that permission?
And taking over one of the richest places on earth.
We have to look at all the drivers. The economic drain, the outright political defiance, the military buildup, and this just staggering level of internal betrayal.
And you have to start with the money. You always have to start with the money.
Follow the money trail.
If you want to understand this war, that's where you look. The EIC's push for economic dominance in Bengal wasn't subtle. It was systematic financial predation. And it all centered on one single misused legal tool.
Okay, let's unpack that, because this is where everything starts to bleed out. The sources all point to this mechanism of exploitation, the Dast Acts. For anyone listening, what were these exactly? And how did they become the spark that lit the whole fire?
Right. So you can think of the Dast Acts as basically trade permits.
Like a golden ticket for trade.
A golden ticket is a great way to put it. They were these royal passes, originally granted way back by the Mughal emperor, that allowed the East India Company to move its goods all over Bengal without paying local customs duties.
So no transit taxes.
No transit taxes. The whole idea was to make official company trade easier, faster and cheaper.
Okay, so it's a legitimate commercial advantage, but, and I'm sensing a big but, here, it's only for the company's official business.
Exactly, and this is where the whole system just collapses into corruption. The EIC officials, who were actually, believe it or not, pretty underpaid by the company itself.
Oh, interesting.
They realized they could use these official Dast Acts for their own personal, private trade. They were running these massive side businesses in textiles, salt, all sorts of things, all under the protection of the company's tax-free status.
Wow, so that's essentially using the corporate account to run a hugely profitable private side hustle.
That's a perfect modern analogy. And it meant that huge amounts of private goods were moving through Bengal without a single rupee going to the Nawab's treasury.
And we're not talking small amounts here.
Oh no. We are talking about what could be Hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling a year in lost revenue. For Siraj ud-Daulah, this wasn't just a few bad apples cheating the system.
No, it's a threat to his entire government.
It was an existential threat to his state's finances. He couldn't govern without that revenue, so the Das tax made him see the British not just as greedy, but as a genuine danger.
Which sets up this unavoidable collision course.
Yeah.
If you are systematically starving the local government of its money, that government is going to see you as an enemy, and that financial threat very quickly becomes political.
Absolutely. Siraj ud-Daulah was already deeply suspicious. He saw the British influence growing, and he saw it as corrosive to his authority. They weren't acting like respectful traitors anymore. They were acting like a parallel power.
Right, like a state within a state. And this is where the EIC goes from sneaky economic tricks to just openly defying the Nawab's power on the ground. Our sources point to two really specific provocations that just blew everything up.
The first one was a massive violation of his control over his own territory. The EIC started building up these huge fortifications in Calcutta, especially around Fort William.
And they did this without his permission.
Without even asking for it. In the political language of the 18th century, building a fort on someone else's land without their consent is basically an act of rebellion. It says, we're here to stay and your rules don't apply to us.
It's the EIC planting their flag and saying, our castle, our rules, your laws stop at our moat. And the second provocation seems almost personal. It feels like it was designed to disrespect him directly.
It was a clear slap in the face. The British gave asylum to a man named Krishna Das. He was a higher-ranking official who was, for all intents and purposes, an enemy of the Nawab.
And what had he done?
He had fled after mismanaging a large amount of treasury funds. By sheltering him, the British were basically saying, we don't respect your justice system. We'll protect your criminals if we want to. It was just a brazen show of contempt.
So let's recap. The Nawab's treasury is being drained. His territory is being fortified without his consent, and his authority is being undermined by the British, harboring his enemies. It's actually amazing it took until 1757 for war to break out.
Well, the Nawab felt he had no other choice. He had to reassert his authority. So his army marched on Calcutta and they captured Fort William. This was him trying to physically dismantle the EIC's defiance.
And he captured the British personnel there.
Yes, he imprisoned them.
And this incident, of course, becomes what the British later called the infamous Black Hole of Calcutta.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that this story was immediately weaponized by the British to justify what they did next.
Oh, absolutely. The event itself, where a number of prisoners died tragically overnight in a small guard room, likely from suffocation, that part is undeniable. But what historical analysis shows is that the EIC and British historians later on, they grossly exaggerated the numbers and framed it as a deliberate, monstrous act of barbarism.
It was more likely just tragic negligence.
Exactly. Negligence on the part of the Nawab's local commanders. But it became this incredibly powerful piece of propaganda. It was the perfect justification for turning what was a trade dispute into a full-scale war of revenge.
It gave them the moral high ground, or at least the appearance of it.
It gave them the moral license they needed. The EIC simply could not afford to lose Bengal. It was too profitable. So the story of the Black Hole gave them the excuse they needed to send in the military. They immediately sent Robert Clive, who was already this ruthless and effective commander, up from Madras to organize a decisive response.
Now, this is the part that never quite adds up if you just look at the numbers. Clive shows up with, what, maybe 3,000 troops?
Something like that, yeah.
And Siraj ud-Daulah has an army of maybe 50,000? It's a massive mismatch. Which is why the sources are so clear. The key to the British victory wasn't military genius. It was something far more, well, insidious.
It was conspiracy. This is where it becomes a political thriller, not a war story. Clive knew, he was smart enough to know, that a straight-up fight against an army that much larger was incredibly risky. So he focused his energy not on battlefield tactics, but on political manipulation, on bribery.
He decided it was easier to buy the enemy's army than to fight it.
He needed to neutralize it from the inside. He didn't conquer the army, he purchased its commander.
That's the most direct way to put it.
He and the EIC started making deals with all these disgruntled nobles and bankers in Bengal who didn't like the young Nawab. But the real linchpin, the one name that matters most, is Mir Jafar.
And Mir Jafar was the commander-in-chief of the Nawab's entire army. The one man Siraj ud-Daulah should have been able to trust with his life.
And Clive made him an offer he couldn't refuse. The British promised to make Mir Jafar the new Nawab of Bengal.
Wow.
In exchange, all Jafar had to do was make sure that his part of the army, the largest part, just stood aside and didn't fight when the battle started.
You really cannot overstate how fundamental this betrayal is. The Battle of Plassey itself was, what, a few hours long?
Barely that.
When the fighting starts, Mir Jafar takes his 35,000 troops, marches them over to the side, and just watches.
He just watches as the smaller, loyal part of the Nawab's army gets overwhelmed. It was a choreographed abandonment. The British victory was guaranteed the moment Mir Jafar took the bribe, days before any shots were even fired.
The battle was a sham.
It was a total sham. Siraj ud-Daulah fled when he realized what was happening, and the EIC, with very few casualties, basically just walked in and took over. They installed Mir Jafar as their puppet Nawab, and that was it. They were now the real power in Bengal.
So with this level of internal conspiracy brewing, you have to wonder, why wasn't Siraj ud-Daulah more focused on this British threat? Why was he distracted? Our sources point to another critical factor here.
Yeah, if you zoom out and look at the bigger geopolitical picture, the Nawab was facing major pressure from another direction entirely, specifically from the Afghans. The Durrani Empire, under Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a huge military power to the west, and they were eyeing northern India. So the Nawab couldn't put all of his attention and all of his military resources just on the British problem in Bengal.
So he's looking over his shoulder at a potential invasion from one side, while this commercial entity is bribing his generals and stealing his tax money from the other side.
It was a perfect storm. The British victory wasn't about superior soldiers. It was this lethal mix of economic exploitation with the Dastaks, the political arrogance of building forts using propaganda like the Black Hole story, and then crucially, the political sabotage of buying Mir Jafar, all while the Nawab was looking the other way.
So what did that victory actually mean on the ground in the immediate aftermath of Plassey in 1757?
It meant the immediate formal transfer of real political power to the East India Company. They didn't just win a battle, they won the right to install their own puppet rulers. And most importantly, they eventually got the Diwani.
The Diwani? What's that?
The Diwani was the right to collect all the tax revenue and run the civil justice system for the entire region.
The power to tax. That's real power.
That is real power. It meant a private trading company now controlled the economic destiny of millions of people. This is the moment that cements their transition. They go from traders to rulers, and they lay the groundwork for the next 200 years of British rule.
This whole deep dive really shows that the Battle of Plassey wasn't some kind of military masterpiece. It was a political heist.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
It was won by a combination of, on one hand, this relentless financial greed through the misuse of the Dastaks, and on the other, this incredibly cynical political sabotage, all personified by Mir Jafar.
And it leaves us with a really important question when we look back at history. How easily a private company, the EIC, used local political divisions to seize sovereign control over a vast, wealthy territory. This wasn't a war between nations. It was a corporate takeover dressed up as a war.
And the long-term reverberations of that victory, a victory rooted entirely in conspiracy and economic exploitation, it just fundamentally rewrote the map of global power. Something to really think about when you consider the role of massive corporations and their relationship with political power today.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a single moment in history, a flashpoint, really. It's a battle that, wasn't huge by global standards, but it just completely reshaped the future of South Asia. We're talking about the Battle of Plassey in 1757.
It's so much more than a pivot point. It's almost like the moment history splits. And our mission today is to really dig into the sources and understand the immediate aftermath, the real cost.
Right.
We need to see how this one regional victory so quickly and profoundly changed everything. The politics, and maybe more importantly, the economic fate of Bengal.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're looking at how a victory that was won through, let's be honest, political manipulation and betrayal.
Oh, massive.
Not just military might. How that set the stage for 2 centuries of colonial rule. The sources are so clear. The change was fast, it was deliberate, and it was about money from the very beginning.
From minute one.
So let's start with the politics, because that was the immediate change you could see right away. The British East India Company, the EIC, they didn't waste any time showing who was in charge.
No, they didn't. The very first thing they do is oust the old Nawab Siraj ud-Daulah and install their own guy.
Mir Jafar.
Mir Jafar. And this is where the real drama starts. He wasn't some neutral party. He was the commander who betrayed his own leader right there on the battlefield.
So he was a puppet.
A highly paid, totally pliable British puppet ruler. I mean, this is the undeniable moment the EIC stops being just a trading company and becomes the political power broker.
But wait, if he was being given the throne as a reward, why did he let them interfere so much so fast? Did he actually think he could, get rid of them later?
That's a great question. And the sources suggest it was a bit of both. He was ambitious, but he was also deeply in debt to them.
Politically and financially.
Exactly. The initial payoff the company demanded from him was astronomical. It just instantly showed everyone who was holding the leash. And what's so fascinating is how the company goes from just funding a battle to demanding direct administrative control.
So how did that actually work? What did that interference look like? It couldn't have just been them giving advice.
Oh, not at all. It was meticulous. First, they get the right to fortify Calcutta without anyone being able to challenge them. That gives them a permanent military base, a huge advantage.
Okay.
Then they start meddling with appointments. They demand veto power over who the Nawab chooses for key financial jobs.
So they go for the money men.
They go right for the treasury. And this systematic interference, it's like termites eating away at the foundations. It weakens the authority of the Nawabs bit by bit. Mir Jafar gets to look like a ruler, but the substance, the army, the finances, it's all being hollowed out.
And the political situation was already pretty shaky, right? Plassey kind of blew the lid off all these internal rivalries among the ruling elite.
Exactly. The local elites thought they were just swapping one difficult Nawab for another, someone more accommodating. They had no idea they were basically signing the death warrant for their own independence.
They helped the British win the game without even realizing what game was being played.
That's a perfect way to put it. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the sources make it clear that Plassey wasn't the end of the story. It was the crucial first step.
The stage setter.
The stage setter. The EIC didn't have full formal control in 1757, but they had the mechanism, the puppet ruler, that let them start extracting power and resources.
And that path leads to the next major flashpoint, which happens less than a decade later. Because Mir Jafar, he couldn't keep up with their demands for money, could he?
He couldn't. The treasury was running dry, and their demands were relentless. So when he fails to pay, they just replace him with his son-in-law, Mir Qasim.
And Mir Qasim actually tries to fight back.
He does. He tries to reclaim some independence. He moves the capital. He tries to reform the administration. But any attempt to break free from that financial chokehold was seen as an act of rebellion.
And that leads directly to the Battle of Buxar in 1764.
It does. And if Plassey was about dominance through manipulation, Buxar was about cementing it with force.
Because after Buxar in 1765, the EIC just stops pretending. They're no longer traders asking for permission.
That's the critical legal shift. After that decisive victory, they get something called the Diwani rights for Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
And this was huge.
It was everything. It meant the EIC, a private company, now had the official right to collect all the land revenue, all the taxes, for one of the richest provinces in the entire world.
So the political takeaway here is that Plassey sets up the puppet ruler model, and then Buxar and the Diwani give them the keys to the entire treasury. They control the tax collection, which is, the ultimate source of state power.
Absolutely. Their whole status changes. They go from being privileged foreign merchants to being the actual financial administrators. They've now laid the foundation for colonial rule through both political and direct financial control.
Okay, let's shift gears now to the economy, because this is where the real shockwave hits. The reason they wanted all that political control was for the massive economic prize. And the immediate changes here were just devastating.
And incredibly effective from their point of view.
We mentioned the payoffs. Robert Clive and the EIC demanded a huge sum from Mir Jafar right after Plassey, about £2.5 million sterling.
Which is an insane number for the time.
I mean, to put that in context for you, that's roughly what the EIC's entire annual budget from London was. It was an instant, massive injection of capital straight from Bengal's treasury into their pockets.
And that was just the beginning. The first major economic change was establishing a total EIC monopoly over Bengal's trade.
They just shut everyone else out.
Completely. The French, the Dutch, they were sidelined. The EIC now controlled every major part of the region's commerce.
So this raises the big question for our deep dive. How did all that wealth actually leave Bengal? This is the mechanism people call the drain.
And it's so important to understand this. Before Plassey, when the EIC bought goods like cotton or silk, They had to pay for it with silver and gold shipped from Britain.
So it was actual trade. Money was coming into the local economy.
Right. It was mutually beneficial. But after Plassey, and especially after they got the Diwani, that just stops. They simply use the tax revenue they collect from Bengali farmers and merchants to buy the goods produced in Bengal.
Wow. So they're using Bengal's own money to buy Bengal's own products.
Exactly. The wealth isn't reinvested locally. It's not offset by foreign investment. It's just siphoned out. It pays for the company's administration, its army, and the investment to buy goods to ship back to Britain. Bengal is literally paying for its own resources to be exported and getting nothing back.
And you can see the immediate impact on local industry. I mean, Bengal was world famous for its textiles. Its muslins and silks were legendary.
The best in the world.
And that industry just collapses almost overnight.
It wasn't an accident either. It was engineered. British policies were set up to favor their own cheap, mass-produced textiles from the factories back home.
So they tilted the playing field.
They completely broke it. They put high tariffs on Indian textiles entering Britain, but made sure their own goods could flood into Bengal. They even forced local weavers into these awful contracts, demanding high-quality work for rock-bottom prices.
So you're a weaver, and you can't compete with the cheap imports, and you can't make a living from the contracts. What do?
You're ruined. And that's what happened. It led to mass unemployment and debt for tens of thousands of skilled artisans. It was really the first act of deindustrialization.
And it wasn't just manufacturing. The farming sector was hit just as hard.
Equally dire. The EIC's only goal was to maximize revenue from the Diwani. So they imposed these incredibly heavy taxes on farmers. The system was designed for extraction, not sustainability.
Why would you bother investing in your land or trying to grow more if you know all the profit is just going to be taken away?
You wouldn't. And that's the core of the tragedy. Wow. It completely disincentivized any kind of agricultural investment. Production starts to decline across the board.
And the consequence of that, of course, is famine.
Devastating famine. The big one, the Bengal famine of 1770, killed an estimated 1/3 of the entire population. And the social order was just shattered. The traditional landowners, the zamindars, who had a vested interest in keeping things stable, they were pushed aside.
And replaced by company bureaucrats.
By tax collectors whose only job was to get the money. All power over the land and life moved into the hands of the company.
So when we put it all together, what does it all mean? You have the political takeover after Plassey, followed by this massive economic shockwave. It's a complete transformation.
It is. In less than 2 decades, Bengal goes from being this prosperous, powerful province with global trade links to something totally different.
A resource base.
That's exactly it. The Battle of Plassey started this unstoppable process where Bengal's wealth was systematically used to build British power. It became the engine for colonial expansion. This fusion of political dominance and economic extraction, that's what really laid the foundation for the next 200 years of rule.
So to recap the key takeaways from our deep dive today, Plassey leads instantly to puppet rule, which then creates the instability needed for the next step, Buxar, and the transfer of the Diwani rights.
Which then lets them establish a total trade monopoly.
And institute this systemic resource drain, this self-funding system of extraction.
Which leads directly to the collapse of Bengal's local industries and agriculture, and contributes to that horrific famine.
It's a shocking chain of events.
It is. And as you think about this, consider one final thought from the sources. Given how fast the economic extraction happened and the terrible human cost, think about how critical the control over the mechanism of tax collection really was.
The Diwani.
The Diwani. It wasn't just about winning battles or political dominance. It was getting those rights that provided the endless local funding stream. The empire could pay for itself without needing money from London.
It's self-sustaining.
Exactly. So what does that specific focus on revenue authority tell you about the true levers of power needed to maintain and fund an empire? It's a powerful lesson in how controlling local administration is the key to unlocking global wealth.